Hello and welcome to the Thylacine Research Unit's latest podcast. Tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about a recent sighting in Tasmania, so 2015 sighting. I'm Warren Darren. With me, I have Bill Flowers and Chris Copeland. Guys, how are you going?
Yeah, I've had better weeks, but it's not associated with this, that's for sure.
How about
Well,
Bill?
yeah, I haven't shaved, so I'm even more awesome than last week.
Yeah, it just keeps getting better and better. So, Chris, you've been snowed in a little bit, I hear.
Yeah, it was full on. In 10 years of working in remote Tasmania, I've never actually not gotten home when I wished to, and this week I did not.
Wow, okay, so pretty hectic weather must make all the animals around the place stay pretty close to home.
Very much. And not having, because I was expecting to come home, not having change of clothes and things like that. Yeah, it's been a fun week.
Did you have to shovel all the snow away from the walls of the enclosure to stop the devils getting out?
Oh, the next day for sure.
Okay. It's always a fun job, isn't it?
Oh, great times, great times. Cut down a few trees that fell and stuff. Yeah, great times.
Okay, guys, so tonight we're going to be discussing a subject that's going to be interesting to a lot of people in terms of determining whether the thylacine is still with us. There's been a range of sightings over the years, but I guess people are always interested in recent sightings, and this particular sighting is quite recent, 2015, April, central Tasmania, really promising sighting on the surface of things.
Yeah, it's pretty decent sighting. It's certainly, when it came through the website, it certainly caught my attention, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So I guess to give people a bit of an introduction to the way we handle sightings, Chris, might be useful. So we've already mentioned that this sighting happened in central Tasmania. Why don't we give out the exact locations?
Some of it is to protect the anonymity of the person that's made the sighting. A lot of it's also to protect the animal. If there is a population of thylacine, and I'm not saying that there is, but if there is, bottom line is that I think we have a responsibility to protect that.
Absolutely, and that's got to be one of our primary concerns about doing this type of work, isn't it, Bill?
Oh, yeah, I'd say so. Yeah. It's all about the animal.
Mm, mm. And I guess one of the other things that comes to mind for me is that with these better quality sightings, we want to get out in the field and to get some equipment set up. So we've also got to think about actually preserving the evidence and preserving that particular piece of environment so that we can actually get there and actually see what's happening out there and get the best quality evidence we can get.
You and I also have real degrees, unlike William, who has an arts degree. So we want to quantify things. None of this qualitative stuff. We want to quantify.
Mm, mm. Not that causal-based studies and case-based studies aren't relevant methods of gathering data, Chris, but that's absolutely right. And Bill, in one of our long drives around, in fact, not far from this sighting location,
If Bill was driving, it was a long drive.
It was actually just from to one of the local general stores, but he did tell me that the fact that the best research is a little bit qualitative and a little bit quantitative to get the best of both worlds.
Really?
Well,
Yeah.
that was your point, wasn't it, Bill?
That was my point. And, yeah, you don't need fancy degrees when you got a long beard.
I would have thought that you get some recognition of prior learning just by fronting up at an educational institution and showing that beard, Bill.
You've got a barista certificate, haven't you?
A barista's certificate.
Yeah.
What barista?
A barista, see?
So you'd know that. I wouldn't.
A guy that makes coffee that has a very hipster beard.
Yeah,
It's a
that's something
prerequisite.
good, and I would not. So I don't frequent such places, except when I'm with you, Chris.
True.
Right. So I guess the other thing that's worth mentioning is over the last sort of 6 to 12 months, we have got a handful of recent of good quality sightings. So I'm talking about sort of 2014, 2015
Oh,
that score highly on the Smith system. So that shows you that there are still recent sightings that are happening in Tasmania.
and this one is reasonably close to another report we've had, and that always makes life interesting. As soon as you can start to cluster a few sightings, it certainly gives them more validity than if you just get a random sighting, surely.
Yeah, look, absolutely. And I think that one of the things that I often reflect on is that when there are sightings, is that the government has got a theory about thylacine sightings that says that only a third of sightings get officially reported. So if you look at the sighting numbers that they record and times it by three, you might get a more accurate picture. But of all of the unofficial sightings, then a lot of them would go unreported as well. So you start to build up a picture of what might be happening in a particular area.
For sure. Just to interject there, um, officially reported, surely that's a bit subjective.
Yeah, well, they're the ones that have been recorded by the government. So
Yeah, I
it's
understand that, but I mean, there's not. It's not like you can leap onto the Tas government website and fill in a pro forma or something.
yeah, look, and that's one of the reasons, Chris. Looking strangely, that's a cracker point that you make, isn't it? Is that this is
I
one
specialise in cracker points. Thank you,
cracker
Warren.
point.
I'll just celebrate with a beverage. Just hang on.
Yeah, and
So,
also, Warren, how many of these sightings have not been redacted?
well,
Whoa!
oh, you had to go there, Bill, didn't you?
Four
Use
minutes
the word
into it, and we've
redacted.
used redacted.
Yeah. So, look, what the listeners don't realise is that at certain times I've been on a strict limit of the amount of times I could use the word redacted in any one day. So,
Just
That
used it.
yeah,
that's
I've just used it.
four already. So
Yeah, so I think the cracker point is, Chris, is this is why we actually get a lot of the sightings is because in this day and age of the internet and social media, people who've had an alleged sighting jump on the internet and they want to tell someone about it, and we offer a mechanism that actually allows them to do to enter their details, enter their sighting information, and there's a pretty rapid sort of follow up. And the point is you can't really do that with the government, and we've certainly spoken to people and had reports where people have tried to do that, and they've found it really, really difficult to actually get their sighting report in and to talk to someone who will take them seriously.
particularly after 4 on a Friday and before 9:30 on a Monday.
Yeah, well, exactly right.
Yeah.
And interestingly, the other point that I think gets missed a lot is I spent a bit of time delving into the Fox task force, and they had something like 2,500 sighting reports over about a 3 year period. So massively larger numbers reported than thylacine reports. But when you actually have a look at the sighting reports and the descriptions, the person could be describing any animal, including a thylacine, but they're
Yes.
programmed to think, oh, there's foxes in the area. I know there's a fox
Yeah.
task force. That's who I'll call. In fact, the other interesting point is if you look at the official sighting reporting form, as of about 2010, it actually is a joint form. It says fox and thylacine on it. So
Which yeah has fueled a lot of the conspiracy theories and naysayers and things. In their defence, and I don't normally defend government and things like that, but in their defence, they were also talking DNA, supposed roadkill, scats. Some of their evidence was much more sort of conclusive, in my opinion, than sighting reports. For Fox, this is.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So why don't we actually get on and talk about this particular sighting? And I think that's the meat and potatoes that everybody's really looking for about this particular sighting.
They certainly don't tune in to listen to Bill blither on, so you lead us out.
Okay, so on the 3rd of April, we got an online sighting notification. So the people involved got onto our website, filled in the details, and that automatically comes up on our service here that says that someone's had a sighting response.
You must have answered that, because being Easter, I probably would have had a couple.
Yeah, I think that was the case. I
Yeah.
remember saying to you, "Spool up the chopper," and you responded to me, "Spool up the flopper." And I thought, no, no, no.
Yeah.
I think I'll rather go in T.R.U. 2, driven by Sky Pilot Bill,
Yeah.
rather than get into a helicopter flown by Chris.
Yeah, it was slightly over 0.05. But sorry, continue. I interject.
Continue. So I guess we responded straight away, and when I say we, I mean me. So we, we had a telephone interview with the people involved, and we started to unpack the details about what happened in this particular instance. And fortunately, we were able to have people on site the next day, and we got photos of alleged tracks and prints, and made a bunch of field notes, and had face-to-face discussions with witnesses. And I guess the other thing that we were also able to do is get the exact location of the sighting, because when we actually spoke to the people involved over the phone and to get all the information, how they described it, where they described it, the road junction ended up being, significantly out in terms of right general location. But when it came to tin tacks of where it actually happened, it was actually good to get on the ground really quickly. So, guys, what were your initial impressions of the observations from the interview? We'll go with you first, Chris.
It was really interesting. You must have struggled a little bit with sort of communication, that's for sure.
Yeah, look, absolutely. There was a bit of a hearing issue, and I had to talk quite loudly at one stage, and I think maybe that was part of the phone connection. But yeah, it was difficult. The gent was pretty excited, for starters.
So, how did you go about avoiding sort of leading? I know you've got a lot of experience from your sort of previous life in sort of interrogation and things like that, Warren. Can you just sort of lead us through how you avoid leading someone to give you the result that you are after?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So, for those of people who don't know, I spent a little bit of time in Bosnia, and talking to people about what had happened there during the war and whatnot. So it's really important that when you actually conduct interviews with people, that you ask open questions. You don't lead them by saying, did you see? You inadvertently give a description of the animal, of the environment, and whatnot. So you have to prompt them very carefully. So, for example, the first question is that I ask is, look, just tell us what happened, and you let them talk, and then you might then hone in on particular pieces of information. So, in this particular instance, the subject said that gave a range of distances involved. So talking about at one stage, 100 meters, 50 meters, 10 meters. So you really have to work out that how did he actually sort of see this animal.
Mm-hmm.
I think you also can't overlay your own things like, did you see this? Did you see that?
I think that's a classic mistake that often gets made. Did it look like a dog? Were there stripes? Like they're very direct, in my opinion, sort of quite
Did
leading
it move
questions.
strangely? That's the other one.
Sorry,
What's
say again, Bill.
That often you hear people say, and did it move strangely?
Yeah, and because what
Leading-
happens is quite often, I think, in these sorts of things is that when you have a witness who is trying to report to you that they saw a thylacine, and a, inverted commas, thylacine hunter comes in and starts asking questions, they see that person as some sort of quasi expert. Not that there are any thylacine experts. So when they ask a question, is did it walk strangely, or did it do this, or whatnot? I think the people are almost have to say, oh yes, it did, or because they want to be believed in many instances because they've had this kind of experience. So it's really really easy to lead the witness.
The,
Warren,
Bill.
for, for people who have probably just tuned in, I wonder if you could just give a little summary of the actual sighting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, probably one of the best places to go is to get uh, uh, the actual initial sighting report that we got in. So I'll just bring that up on the computer here.
just while you're
So that
doing that, was so at what point do you whip out the 6-inch nails and the wall socket and go all taken on people?
Yeah, that's really an ineffective way of getting information out of people. Chris, in
So,
my
so,
Waterboarding to me.
yeah, yeah, I could say, look, tell us what you know, or Bill will talk about his beard.
no, no, I did it,
That's
I
a
did it.
that's a far more effective way of getting information out of people. Uh, so,
That have
very,
bored me to tears
very
in 3 minutes.
effective way. So,
And
so
it's a
here,
very good they're allowed to touch it.
so here we are at 4:20 in the afternoon on the 3rd of April. We've got a couple of comments here to say that the witness stepped up onto a log and an animal got out from underneath the log and walked out onto the road for about 100 yards. The witness followed the animal up the road for a while and then it left the road. And so that's what prompted the the investigation of us, essentially saying that they saw a thylacine, and then we then go in and then conduct the phone discussion to actually get that additional information from the actual witness. So, interestingly, with this particular sighting, there's two gentlemen involved, a father and a son. Both of them are relatively elderly, I might add. They've pulled up on a dirt track, so a little bit out of the beaten way. And as they're walking, the one of the gents steps up onto the log, and this animal that he believes is a thylacine comes out from underneath the log. So at one stage, he describes the animal as being 10 feet away from him, and then walks up the road, walks off the road, and then walks back onto the road. In fact, at one stage is near one of the vehicles that they have there. And so he makes this observation of the animal. He describes sort of seeing it for under 10 seconds, and the distance ranging from that 10 feet to up to 100 meters. So he's got a reasonable sighting of this particular animal. He describes a couple of key features in his his report. So he describes the colour of the animal in terms of being sort of a light tan colour. That he obviously saw some sort of pouch, because he was referring to the animal as she, so a female animal. He described seeing stripe markings on the back of the animal going to what he would sort of describe as the butt of the tail. Um, there were two people there, as I said before, but the other person who was actually out with the primary witness didn't report seeing the animal. Um, so the best that he could estimate that the animal was about a foot high off the ground. So I guess he's describing what you'd expect to see as a younger animal. So that's the overall narrative of the story.
A foot high is not a particularly large animal.
That's right. So I guess you're starting to say, is this if this is a thylacine, is it a juvenile animal?
Definitely.
For sure.
Even for a devil, it's not real big, is it?
300 tall, that's sort of getting up to big spotted tail quail more than anything else.
Yeah. Well, it kind of made me sort of think about, okay, what could this animal actually be? So let's for a second assume it's not a thylacine, that it's a case of mistaken identity. What could it be, given that description?
Yeah, obviously, the first one's always going to be dog.
Yep.
Like through convergent evolution, they're reported to look very dog-like, etc. Surely that has to be taken into account.
Yeah, and look, with further sort of analysis of the witness's sort of statement, he described calling out to his father at the time, and that the animal was close to the ute at another time, and that was one of the things in the whole discussion that really didn't sort of sit well with me, because we basically say that the thylacine is this elusive animal that is shy and retiring, world's most elusive animal, hide and seek world champion for the last 80 years, and yet it's still hanging around when people are yelling, and it's observed quite close to a car. That to me actually described typical abandoned dog type behaviour, actually.
Even in my semi-intoxicated Easter state when that report came through, the thing that leapt out to me is that he stepped on a log and it ran away. He was in basic touching distance of that animal.
Yep.
In an area where there is a cluster of sightings. If you're in broad daylight within touching distance of that animal and a metre from your ute, it's certainly going to rule out sort of some of the obvious things, like it was dark, he was old, those sorts of things. It sort of straight away makes it a much more interesting sighting. It's hard to wrongly identify something when you can basically touch it.
Absolutely, and I think that it's a case where the animal's walking away from him. It's walking away rather than running away.
Didn't you make mention of the tail being razor straight?
Well, absolutely, and so he basically said it was razor straight and basically parallel to the ground. So that's not something that you'd expect to see from a dog, for example. So
I think again it sort of depends. Like we've had this discussion like endlessly between you guys, and we've talked about it on our previous podcast, but it maybe depends on what dog you're talking. If you're talking the generic Google dog, probably not. If you're talking specific animals, like imagine a pointer on point with its nose down, tail out straight, things like that. I mean, it can happen, surely.
yeah, it's definitely possible. So I guess the next thing that's worthy of sort of discussion is next day, out we go, people on site taking observations, photos of tracks and prints. So,
Yep.
what do we think of the photos that we've got there, guys?
Which one do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's have a look at what we have here. So, I think we've got a large sort of print, and it's got the 20-cent piece next to it. So this came through in a series of
Yep.
videos that were taken.
Certainly. I've got a screenshot of that right in front of me here.
Yep.
I love the fact that you've got an easily recognisable scale.
Yep.
Bam.
Yep.
Like, anyone that has sort of looked at our currency will know exactly what size this print is immediately because that 20-cent piece.
Yep.
So again, it sort of fits, it correlates with the idea that the animal was 300 tall. We're not looking at a monster size animal because it's probably only 2 times the radius of that 20-cent piece. Or sorry, the diameter of that 20-cent piece.
So what we are seeing here is claws, and I think that's going to have to rule out a feral cat.
For sure. Like, you're not... I 100% agree there. You're not looking at cat, an animal with retractable claws.
Yeah.
So
Bill,
would be in the size range for sure.
Bill, you're the master tracker with skills second to none in this field. Talk us through what's going through your mind when you look at that print.
Well, yeah, it's not real clear, and this is the trouble with photographs. If you're actually there, you're seeing the 3D thing. You know, you move your head side to side, you get a much better vision than you'll ever get with a photograph. Well, there's not much to say really, except that okay, it's got claws. The claws it's dug in a bit. Could be a devil, could be a dog, could be a juvenile thylacine. You know, I think it's just it's pretty open ended.
I'm no expert. My tracking skills certainly aren't second to none, but it's in a gravelly substrate, so it's not going to accept a print beautifully. It's not like going to be river sand or sort of wet soil or something like that. The two things that don't sit particularly well with me, there's no indication that it's mono or trilobular, so that's going to make difficult identification right there.
Yeah.
If you draw a line from the tip of the claws down and you look at where those lines intersect, that axis, if it's thylacine, supposedly should be a fair way back behind where the plantar pad sits.
Mm-hmm.
And in my screenshot here, that would be almost where the print ends.
Yeah.
So from there, if you sort of draw a line down the centre, and it looks symmetrical. It doesn't strike me as being asymmetrical. But again, I'm no expert.
Yeah, so Bill, accepting the fact that Chris's tracking skills are probably third or fourth to none,
possibly
it's a second to none,
or fifth. Yeah,
or fifth.
Yeah.
What do you think of Chris's analysis of the print there?
Yeah, no, it's quite a good analysis. What I'm also seeing is like I see like 1, 2, 3, possibly 4 indentations that look like claws, and to me those claws look like they're pretty splayed out a bit.
Yep.
Like the front paw of a devil, a wombat, possum.
The trouble I'm having with what you're saying there, Will, is that bottom line, all those species have, devil, quolls, things like that, they have an obvious penadactyl limb. They're sort of very, very obvious 5, and if it's front, you get 5 indentations from a Tasmanian devil.
What about, Chris, what I guess you colloquially call a webbing between
Yep.
the toes.
Hmm.
So thylacine doesn't have that webbing as opposed to dogs. Is that correct?
Well, devils certainly have that connective tissue.
Yep.
Um, thing there, like something like a devil's front limb is more primitive. Sort of, the idea is that the further back you go in the geological timescale, animals walk flat on their feet, and then they go up on their toes, and then they go up on their nails like a horse or something like that. Like, so devil's got a relatively primitive front limb, back limb. It's walking flat, and therefore you get the indentation, and it's got the connective tissue. And there's a whole bunch of theories on does that facilitate digging and swimming and things like that, but probably not. It's just sort of connective tissue.
Yeah, so I guess some of the things that we're really talking about is just to remind people our website, www.thylacineresearchunit.org,
Researchunit.org.
researchunit.org,
How many of those lights have you had, Warren?
about a half. So
Wow,
that's
you must be an absolute maggot.
correct. So if people are interested in learning more about thylacine prints, we've got a bunch of information under examining the evidence and footprint section there.
Yep.
And there's actually quite a good drawing taken from a thylacine foot that dates back to 1926 that we've got there, where we're showing a front foot with the five toes and the clear sort of separation between them that people might be interested in.
I know a useless amateur hack that took a relatively decent facsimile of a thylacine foot in the vault too.
Yeah, look, and actually, that's actually a really good story that you might want to tell us, Bill, about that process that you went through to actually get that analog that we could use for field research.
Yeah, we probably should throw it up on our website, shouldn't we?
Warren's
Yeah.
had half a beer, so he'll be throwing it up.
Oh, you guys.
It's the
I'm the only
intellectual
sober one
content.
here, aren't I? This is my Nietzschean philosophy.
It's the intellectual content that people tune in for, Bill.
He's lost it. It's gone.
So Bill,
Yeah, we're in the vaults, yes.
Yeah.
Looking at a lot of the paw prints, there seem to be a lot of conflicting information, and even in Barbara Triggs's books, which, I think Barbara Triggs is great. She does some great books, especially on wombats, but the illustration she had in her book looked a bit more like a piece of modern art than it did look like a paw print. And so I found a lot of them pretty confusing. So I wanted to actually see the real paw prints myself. And so I got to sketch from real life paws. And so, yeah, I think we should throw that up on our website as maybe it's a guide.
Yeah.
I don't do this very often, but Bill is actually selling himself short there. Like, I think the footprint that Bill has drawn and then watercoloured from that specimen in the vault could end up being the definitive guide to thylacine footprints.
Yeah. Look, and I think it's an excellent example because one of the things that we have to consider is a lot of the feet that people take photos of. It really depends on a lot of things could happen to that particular animal after death that can actually change the shape of the foot. Was it trapped and was that foot swollen? A lot of
desiccated.
Taxidermy specimens and whatnot change the shape because literally the animal's been skinned and then stitched back together. So that can really change the shape of the foot. But with this particular one, it was preserved very well and was actually a separate detached leg. And Bill was there taking his time to actually draw this and then using it in the field for later analysis. So
it also allowed us to sort of have a look at some of the footprints that were in the vault and things, and there was always reports that some of those that were taken in the 1830s were wombat, and yeah, I think a lot of them are.
Yeah. I don't think we saw any casts in there that certainly the master tracker thought were thylacine. That's for sure.
No, let's talk about this back foot,
Yeah.
supposed back foot.
Yeah. Okay. So lead us through that then, Chris.
Hang on. Okay, again, I'm no expert, fifth to none, but
Fifth none.
yeah, ultimately same substrate. It is a little bit sort of stirred up, this one, so a bit of pressure has been applied to the back. It's a deeper print, in my opinion. So suddenly, does that suggest that this animal is driving its locomotion from its back feet? I don't know. I can only see 4 digits, which sits fine. That's okay. But it's certainly quite a small print, and I'd suggest that the claws are quite splayed out. And I don't know, it's a difficult one, this one.
Yeah. Bill, what do you think?
It is difficult. I'm just looking at it now, and yeah, I mean it's not good substrate for taking prints. But what we can see is it is very small, and yeah, and the claws are splayed out. From my experience of sketching the paws, the claws are very close together on thylacine, but this substrate being a bit firmer might splay them out a bit, I guess.
Would you suggest that, like, one of these is offset slightly? Like, if so, I don't know, like the size, the sort of the splaying of the digits. The other thing maybe we can't rule out is, are these prints even associated with the sighting? Because bottom line, that the information was gathered the next day. Are the prints even associated with the sighting? Could this be another species walking in the vicinity of where the sighting was made?
Yeah.
Well, you think that that's absolutely possible, particularly, let's assume that that this actually is a thylacine, that there's every reason to think that thylacine could be following trails of other animals in the area. It's going to be, one of the most dangerous predators in the area, so it's going to be out there looking for prey.
Absolutely, and a lot of these species, or a lot of species full stop, unless threatened, follow game trails.
I think, though, in that case, you'd probably see the thylacines prints there. I think also we're looking at very small prints, and also a description of a very small animal. So my feeling is, okay, he's describing something a foot high off the ground, and here we're seeing paw print consistent with probably that size.
Yeah,
it's the same animal,
which we can ascertain through the use of yet another reference with the 20-cent piece, which is magic.
Yeah, so that leads on to the photo of the track line, and I think the track line photos are absolutely essential to be able to accurately identify any animal, because I'd say that it's quite possible to get a one-off print that could look very thylacine-like, even though it's not a thylacine. But if you get prints that look okay, and then a matching gait in a long track line, I think that that starts to build the credibility of the evidence. So, Chris, what do you think about the track line here?
I like it. The fact that you've got your 20-cent pieces near each footprint, you've got some track tape, flagging tape to sort of indicate where it starts and ends and things. It was actually this photograph of the track line that stopped me instantly dismissing it, to be honest.
Yep.
And in the centre of that shot, there appears to be a sort of combination of prints that does line up quite interestingly. On our sort of gate, it looks like it could be your number 5 position.
Yep. So when you're referring to on our gate, what are you talking about there, Chris?
Oh, sorry. Like if you Google search Thylacine gate, one of the first hits you'll come up with, I believe it's from Thylacine Museum originally.
Yeah.
They have the gate cycle, and it breaks it into like sort of positions of the footprint.
Yeah.
The thing I struggle with there is that if it looks like number 5, I can't see position 6.
Yeah.
Within that gate cycle that we're talking about. So, whilst not conclusive, it's certainly interesting.
Yeah. What do you think, Bill?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm also going back to looking at actual prints. You can sort of see the prints probably even a bit clearer in this photo than you can straight over top, which is what I was saying before. The trouble with photographs convert everything into 2D. And if you're 3D, you can sort of move around, see it a bit better.
So would we be expecting to get the elongated pad track here, Warren?
Well, I mean that's a really good question, Chris.
I'm full of it, Warren. Sorry, full of them, Warren.
Yeah, you're too quick there. Look, I'd suggest that there are a couple of things about thylacine prints that you'd expect to see rarely. One would be the elongated footprint, and the second one is the appearance of that fifth claw or fifth toe in the print. So I'd imagine that you might see the occasional one, but certainly the absence of an elongated rear foot pad doesn't concern me at all. In fact, I'm probably more suspicious if I actually see one rather than it not being there.
My personal opinion is that the only real time that you'd probably see that elongated pad track is if the animal was stationary. But then it would be fairly easy to determine if the animal was stationary because your two front limbs would be together.
Yep.
Like in Devil, my tracking skills are nothing compared to William's, but in Devil, you know full well if your Devil that you're looking at is stationary or moving by whether those front feet are together or split.
Yep.
But there has been instances where I'm wrong.
Yeah, but they'd be so rare that they're not worth talking about.
Absolutely, and I can BS my way out of them anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, what about, guys, the scat that was found at the site?
Devil.
Devil? Okay, so thanks for building the suspense there, guys.
Bill doesn't really grasp the whole Jeopardy thing. Okay, there's 2 pictures of scats or very rapid videos that I've screenshot to get pictures. Number 2, for me, absolutely Tasmanian Devil. Yep. Number 1 is certainly different, but you've got the presence of bone shards and fur and things like that. It's calcified, so it's sort of a white, and then it's been rehydrated through wet weather or time. So Scat 1, I'd say, has been in position for quite a long time because it's sort of rehydrated, it's fallen apart, it's given you the ability to see what's contained within it. I'd possibly rule out that is even associated with the sighting that we're talking about. Scat 2, right, it's a lot fresher. It's it's got your classic sort of different digestive stages of something like Tasmanian Devil. So devils kill through the back of the neck, and then they tend to eat the fat and the organs and the vascular tissue and things like that, and then they'll sort of progress into cartilage, bone, fur, those sorts of things. So you'll tend to sort of see it go from black through to sort of greeny grey, white, with the bone shards and the fur at the end, as they've sort of taken time to digest that meal. And for me, it's devil.
I'd like to probably point out here at this stage that for 8 years I picked up devil droppings as part of my job, and Chris has done it for 5 years or 6 years more than I have.
15 now, William.
Yeah, so I when Chris and I see devil droppings, we just see devil droppings as end of story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry about the slow build up there.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's a really good point. So this is why we take photos of these scats and we don't put them in plastic bags to have them analysed, because if you two guys who have got such a great depth of knowledge on the other marsupial carnivores can very, very quickly realise that this is not a thylacine sort of scat. It's clearly devil, and why collect it? It's only the unusual ones that are going to be large, the right size, that we're going to have the need to have analysed.
The ribs in the next shot are quite interesting.
Yeah, Chris, and I really wanted to talk to you about that, because I think we all put our hands up and say we're not thylacine experts, but both of you gentlemen have got a reasonable claim on being devil experts. And would a devil preying on an animal leave ribs cast asunder like that?
Yes.
So just because I think that's a common myth that devils eat every skerrick of an animal, including all of the bones, isn't it?
That's myth 4,973 of the Tasmanian devil.
Yeah. It depends on the situation. If you got devils that are extremely hungry and you give them a small meal, yeah, they'll eat everything. But most of the time, they've got more opportunity to food. They're going to leave stuff they don't want to eat. They're just going to go for fat and muscle first, and intestines, all the grizzly bits. They'll eat bone and fur last.
Yep. So my experience is kill through the back of the neck, like sort of gnaw in through the anus, cloaca, pouch, move the intestinal.
Devils here, not you personally.
Sorry?
We're talking devils here, not you personally.
Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, and Chris, you do have a limit on the amount of times you can say the word cloaca in a day.
Okay, I've said it once.
Yeah.
I'll redact my use of cloaca and instead use the word cloaca.
Well, I won't redact my beard, I'm sorry.
I'd like to redact your beard.
Yes.
From there, once the intestines are sort of moved out, that gives the ability to eat the fat store from the butt of the tail or the base of the tail. It gives the ability to consume any subcutaneous fat, and some marsupials store fat under the skin, some don't. Then the devil will tend to eat the fat that's stored around certain organs. Then it will tend to eat the organs itself. Then the vascular tissue, which is sort of neck, nose, cheeks, around the femoral artery, around the anus, and then sort of bottom line, you're into your muscle, your skin, your fur, your cartilage, your bone.
Yeah. Okay, so
sounds yummy.
Yeah, so moving on from the word cloaca, Bill, the habitat in the area. So we've got a nice Google Earth image there of where the sighting took place. We've been in that area multiple times. Sometimes driving through very slowly in T.R.U. 2. Which is walking pace for those of you who don't know. What do we think about the habitat?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. There's a river close by, the water source.
There's also a couple of settlements.
Yeah, there is, but But also there's being other sightings in that location too, isn't there?
Yeah. So we're sort of interdispersed between sort of semi-rural agriculture, dry sclerophyll, and mixed sclerophyll.
Mm.
So it's sort of, yeah, it's probably a great habitat, to be honest.
Yeah, and
There's
look
a
at
mosaic of different sort of habitats, different plant communities. Yeah, more productivity, more prey, higher density of predators.
And judging on the size of the animal, maybe it's a possibility that it's just dispersed from the den.
yeah. Well, that was an interesting point I was going to raise in terms of April. Let's say that this is a juvenile animal, and assuming that under a year, I think in Geiler's analysis of all the bounty records, he was sort of saying that that his theory was that animals around that 6 to 9 months sort of period was they would still be with their parents. So this animal's around that age potentially.
Not not meaning to be pedantic, but in
Yep.
my opinion, it would be parent.
Parent. Yep.
No,
Okay. So
no
just
paternal role. So the male
yeah.
would not be in the vicinity of that litter.
Yeah.
It would be maternal. So the
Yeah.
female with the young.
So, look, Kristen, it's not like you to be pedantic.
No, it's not.
Bill, why are you laughing so much? So, let's assume that let's say it's at the maximum of that age sort of range I gave, 9 months old.
Yep.
So this is April. What
Dead
do we
on.
think?
Dead on devil breeding.
Yeah, so that's sort of consistent to say if it's breeding around the same time as devils would, that
Like
you'd
it'd be
expect.
second estrus devil. So I've got no problem with sort of young dispersing at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
But
as we know, devils, when they disperse, so often get into all sorts of trouble. So maybe this is like one of those cases where, thylacine has dispersed and it's tangled with a human and then run off.
dispersing devils get into bar fights all the time and stuff, Bill. Yep.
Well, it's funny you mention that, Bill, because Chris, get you two guys confused all the time.
Yeah.
Twins is talking about bar fights. This is within a short drive of two interesting bars that we visited and got completely different welcomes in. I might add.
Absolutely. So, like, what did Geiler suggest for the sort of time frame that young stay with mum in the thylacine species, Warren?
Yeah, so he was very much in the under a year, so that 6 to 9 months sort of maximum, so that they're fully formed, and I guess from a secondary evidence perspective, you've got things like the Mullins group as a classic example of thylacine pups that were captured with the mother. The mother gets snared or captured, and then the pups stay with the mother, and they all get bagged up. And interestingly, in this particular area, in our database and Google Earth references, I've got all of the live captures of thylacines that were recorded in their locations, and these are the animals that ended up in the zoos and the menageries and those sorts of things. But a number of them were actually taken very close to where this sighting occurred.
Yeah. I reckon Bill's old enough to have seen thylacine in Launceston and Hobart, but that's another point.
Yeah.
I struggle with that. The reason I asked you to quote it, because A, I knew you'd know it off the top of your head, but B, I do struggle with it a little bit because, sort of bottom line, 9 to 10 months, that's basically sort of the same period to devil.
Yep.
And devil have a life cycle of 5 to 6 years, depending whether it's male or female. Sort of 10 months, let's say, to dispersion. and then they disperse, and you get sort of pretty high attrition rates, sort of thought to be about 50% death rate in that time frame. So from, let's say, 10 months through to 24 months, they are considered sub-adult. They're sort of competing in their own right, but they're not sexually mature. And then they breed at 2, breed at 3, breed at 4, and particularly male life expectancy wilds 5, females up to 6. Thylacine was a little bit longer lived from all reports. I've heard reports of up to 12, which doesn't sit particularly well with me, but we'll go with it. Why would they raise their young for such a short time frame? They're not a particularly fecund animal. They're having a small amount of young in their reasonably short life. Wouldn't it pay to raise those young for the 20-odd% of their life expectancy like Tasmanian devil do to give them a good chance of survival? There's no pack to support. There's no safety net of the social grouping, in my opinion, or anything like that. It just... That sort of opinion of Guyler, who I've got a tremendous amount of respect for, it's never quite rung true for me.
Yeah, look, and I think, I guess part of the answer to that would be understanding what is that breeding cycle, how frequently are they actually having litters?
Is it every second year, which would make more sense? Top order predator. You can't sort of have an infinite number of top order predators in an area, those sorts of things, but we may not ever know.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting thing, and I think that when you look at how Guyler actually made his deductions, it was all based on and the analysis of bounty records, predominantly. There obviously was one instance of pups being born in captivity in the Melbourne Zoo. So, but
hotly debated, as most people would know that listen to this. There is a lot of debate over that.
Yeah. So, but and part of the reason why there is a debate is just the typical, poor record keeping of the time.
Yeah.
So, were they really born in the wild? Were they already, in the pouch? All those sorts of things, need to be taken into account.
So, in your third or fourth rate opinion, does this meet the 3 H's, Warren?
Look, I think that's a gross exaggeration of my capability and understanding of the situation here, Chris. In my rank amateur assessment, the 3 H's were firstly habitat. The habitat is great. I agree with both you and Bill in that regards. Could absolutely see thylacine in this area, particularly when you start heading west and further southwest. It starts to become quite thick, and if you subscribe to Cole Bailey's corridor theory, you could see that there's plenty of access to corridors in remote, untouched parts of Tasmania there. I think when you look at the history of human interaction post 1936, excellent sightings in that particular area. Recent sightings, there's one of a reported Thylacine roadkill not far from this, plus our witness mentioned that an associate of his actually saw a thylacine walk across a road, had to stop his vehicle to let it go past, and that's another instance of where how could you make that mistake if you're that close and you're looking at it from that perpendicular angle.
Yeah.
And I guess pre-bounty, absolutely, as I said, a lot of live captures taken in that area, number of bounties taken from that space, quite close to a number of the railheads as well, where the bounties were actually collected, and the railheads where the animals were taken to go off to the various zoos around the world. So, 3 H's, big green ticks.
Okay, so while you're in geek mode, geek us through the Smith report and keep it to the barest minimum.
Yeah, so...
And from there, geek us through the Smith report briefly for this sighting.
Absolutely, two great big challenges. So the Smith reporting system is a classification system that was proposed by Steve Smith, who was working with Parks and Wildlife at the time, and as part of a joint sponsored study with the World Wildlife Federation, came up with a mechanism of classifying all thylacine reports by scoring them in a number of aspects to determine the quality of the sighting. So what he did is he analysed around 400 official sightings that had been made to the Tasmanian government between 1936 and 1980, and then used that data to actually classify the types of sightings and whatnot. So it talks about things like the habitat, the calibre of the witness in terms of their knowledge of local native fauna, how well they're regarded in their local community, the circumstances of the report, the visibility, the number of observers, the duration. So things like the duration, the longer that you see the animal, the higher the score. The visibility, the clearer the day, the better the visibility, the higher the score. The number of observers, the more observers, the higher the score. So that's the general.
So in short, he is trying to quantify what is a relatively qualitative thing.
Absolutely.
And so what's the scoring system?
So the scoring system is a score out of 50. So you have from 0 to 14 is questionable, 15 to 24 is a fair report, 25 to 37 is a good report, and 38 to 50 is a very good report.
So of course from there you run an ANOVA over it, or a chi-squared test or something like that.
Probably a spreadsheet, I'd say.
Yeah.
So ultimately, from what your description, there still is some subjective things in that. The fact that you said the standing in the community. I mean, who rates that?
Well, that's right. And so that's where the investigator has to make parallel investigations in terms of saying, is this person someone who has made false reports before? Do they seem overly excitable?
If I spoke to your wife, she'd probably give you a 0. If I spoke to one of your underlings, they'd be forced to give you a 15 or something.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. In fact, if my wife gave me a score of 0, I'd be very happy with that.
So what did the Smith report... Oh, sorry, I'll start again. What did the Smith system rate or rank for this sighting?
Yeah, so for this particular sighting, it scored 40 out of 50, which gives it a very good rating.
Yep. So is that anywhere near the highest rating we've achieved?
It would be probably one of the highest ratings, very, very close. I think 38, 39.
What's that, 80% out of 100?
Yeah. So in comparison to, say, a Hans Narding type sighting, Hans Narding type sighting is in the high 40s range. So so better than this, but still well and truly up there.
So has anyone ever rated a clear 50?
So there are a couple of reports that are in the 50s range. So not that we've taken, but certainly there are a handful of sightings that have got 50s.
So therefore, why are they not as sort of held in anywhere near as high esteem, or even anywhere near as well known as something like the Narding sighting? Just as a very quick tangent.
Yeah, look, and I think it really gets back to your earlier point in terms of it's the credibility within the community. The question is what is the community?
Hang on, Kim's just on the phone. She's just giving you a minus score.
Okay, now get off that's a long call, sweetie. So if that community is the scientific community, if it's the community of parks and wildlife rangers that actually go out and do these investigations, then I'd imagine that score would be quite different. I'd also imagine things like the very first criteria is familiarity with native fauna.
Yeah.
A lot of reports come in from people who are tourists, for example. We've heard plenty of those reports, and quite often they say they don't realise they've seen a thylacine until they stop and
look in a book and imprint it into their head.
Absolutely.
So my point there is like the first thing that sprung to mind was our previous podcast about the Doyle. Straight away, if what they say about the Doyles is true and that they had been in and out of prison, yada yada, generally society's going to look down upon them more than someone like Hans, who was a wildlife biologist. But realistically, why should they? Just because you've got in trouble with the law or got a few speeding tickets doesn't make you a serial hoaxer for cryptids and things like that. I just struggle with maybe some of the sort of subjectivity, if that's a word, of this. Some of it, other parts of it are real good, but things like the standing in the community, I think in 2015 we could possibly do a little bit better.
Yeah, so maybe what we need is the flowers system, where we modify that.
If they have a beard, they must be right. If they haven't, it's dubious.
So maybe we have the Copeland system then.
Let's keep away from the flower system. I don't know, but it's something that we'll have to look at.
Just to support Chris there. If they've got good standing in the community versus those who have been, say, in jail or whatever, those who have got good standing in the community are probably very deceptive and have got their way out of jail because they've been caught.
My God,
life of undetected crime.
I'm actually going to agree with Bill here.
Yeah.
So there is a first. Hang on, that random jolt that everyone felt at home, that was just the earth going off on a new tangent.
Yeah.
Because I agreed with Bill, but it's a real good point.
Yeah.
So back to it. The Smith report for this sighting, in short, 40. What did you say? 40 out of 50.
Yep.
80% if it was marked out of 100. It's a pretty significant score.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good sighting, but I guess that really leaves us to the next couple of questions in terms of, Chris, what are the things that you like about this particular sighting? All of the other evidence, the photos, the Smith reporting system, the field notes that were taken. What is it that in this report that you think indicates that it may be a thylacine?
I like the protocol that's been used. I like the documentation of the evidence. I like the fact that we've been able to collate that. I don't like the fact that we weren't able to get out there on the day, but that's always going to happen when you get a sighting that's hundreds of kilometres away from home, or in my case, you were possibly over 0.05 and couldn't get there anyway. It was Easter, come on. 4 days off. So I like the protocol. I like the fact that we've been able to sort of have a decent attempt at quantifying a sighting which is inherently fairly qualitative, as I've banged on all night about. I think the Smith system possibly needs to be sort of fine-tuned for modern time. The gate, the track print that we got, I like. Some of the footprints not so much. The scats, no. The ribs, no. Mixed bag.
Yep. The habitat and the history.
Love it. Habitat's fine, no prob. History meets the 3 H's perfectly, don't have a problem with it.
Okay, Bill, what do you like about this particular sighting?
I like the fact that it's sighted on the 3rd and not the 1st.
Yep.
That's actually a damn good point.
And I think if there are thylacines out there on the 1st of April, they should just go for it, Nothing's going to give them.
Yeah.
They run all over the road.
So they'll get their iPhones out of their pouches.
Yeah.
Look at whether it's
on the 1st.
Yeah.
Nobody's anyway. I like the field notes. The man we put out on the job was very familiar with
Yeah.
animal tracks,
If we
and his
couldn't be there,
conclusion.
I trust his judgment. If we couldn't be there to view it ourselves, I trust his judgment, his knowledge, and the fact that he sent us a bucket load of photos.
Yeah, and like I say, you look at just photographs or even the video. It was just like from one angle, but when you're there in real life, um, you're not seeing it in 2D, you're seeing it in 3D. You've got a much better idea. And so his conclusion is that he thought it wasn't dog or devil, but he said it could have been a juvenile thylacine. And so that, to me, is, I find that very interesting. Also, was there recent reports of yips and yaps in the area?
Yeah, absolutely. So there had been a number of anecdotal reports in the weeks leading up to that to the sighting from tourists coming from the more heavily vegetated western side of that river there. So again, good positive indicators.
So let's wrap this gift that is our podcast up for people.
Yep.
And throw out the good old-fashioned T.R.U. skeptometer, Warren Darragh.
Yeah, look, it's pretty tough because I agree with a lot of what you guys have said in terms of saying, the man on the ground very 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 credible, knows his stuff, not excitable, all those sorts of things.
I know.
The quality of the report, I sort of think, how could you get it wrong if it was that close, that kind of thing. But I guess the skeptic in me has to come to the fore in terms of saying, well, the footprint photos aren't that great, but the track line looks really good.
You're dithering. Give me a score.
Yeah, let me say, world record high score for me, 4 out of 10.
Whoa, that's pretty high. And you, William J. Flowers, Esquire?
I'm going 50% because I
Yep.
cannot dismiss the photographs as not being thylacine.
Yep.
I can't say it's definitely not thylacine. The man we put on the ground, have a lot of faith in him as a tracker, and he says it could be. So I'm going to sit on the fence. I'm going to say 5, which means 50-50 either way.
Whoa. So that's a 50% on our scale. 1, no chance. 10, bloody hell, that's a thylacine. You're going, that could be a thylacine.
Right. It could be.
Yep. So, for me, I'm like, the fact that it was at such close range, and you've got the gate, the track line, scats, bit of a downer, footprints, bit of a downer. I'm going to have to go, I'm in an optimistic mood, I'd say 2.5, 3.
Well, pretty high for Christopher.
I know,
Right.
but
So
it's
that's saying
still
it's a
25%. Yeah.
30% chance. Let's just round up, right, Chris? Because that's what my spreadsheet does. 30% chance, right?
Yeah.
That an animal that's believed to be extinct.
Yep.
That this points that there was on the 3rd of April, 2015. That there was one.
In my defence, can you make a mistake? If you can reach out and touch this supposedly extinct animal, and this guy has grown up in this area, in this state, I mean, you're sort of getting down to a point, not so much of misidentification, but if, like, is it a thylacine? If it's not a thylacine, what is it? I mean, he was close enough in broad daylight, regardless of how many beverages he may have had over Easter or whatever, that he's going to be able to get a good observation.
Yeah, no, I agree. Cracker of a sighting.
Cracker of a podcast.
Righto, so that's it for this particular podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Until we meet again, hopefully we'll have another podcast available in the next week or so, looking for some suggestions for the next topic.
So we haven't decided yet, so bottom line, put your ideas for the next podcast up on Facebook or tweet us, and we will sort of wade through the suggestions and talk about something that you guys want us to talk about.
Absolutely, and we'll put all the photos that Chris has been referring to of the secondary evidence up on Facebook as well for people to have a look at. We won't put up the map, but we'll put up the photos of the footprints and the track lines and whatnot. So and also the Smith report, and people can make up their own mind.
In the immortal words of our mates Cam and Kyle, go hug someone. Peace.
See you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Oh, right.